More than 13.8 billion years ago, a single event created everything we know today. Before this, there was nothing. That was until our universe leaped into existence, creating every galaxy, solar system, planet, star, and literally everything we've ever known. That was the Big Bang, the first chapter of this story. This is the Little Big History of Guns. The second chapter in this story after the Big Bang is the first threshold, stars. Immediately after the Big Bang, matter and the two most basic elements known to man, hydrogen and helium, were created. These two chemical elements were key in the formation of stars. With the creation of stars came new matter and elements, which is the third chapter so far, new chemical elements. Most guns are made of the same materials. Some are made of new polymers and plastics, but most firearms are made with good old-fashioned steel and wood. Steel is derived from iron, and iron comes all the way from stars that are past their prime. These destructive, iconic weapons all come from the same place, supernovas. Once these stars croaked, they made supernovas that scatter the new elements everywhere across the world. And these massive stars, those are more than 8 solar masses. The force of gravity drove the temperature in the core up so outlandishly high that it triggered thermonuclear reactions that created a long list of new elements, which included iron and much more. The death of these stars was the particles and gases that were left behind after the death of the stars resulted in accretion. Through gravity, the masses of gas eventually started forming planets and such. Thanks to the right Goldilocks conditions and ingredients, our sun and the rest of our solar system as we know it was made. 4.5 billion years ago, Earth inherited some of the precious metals and elements from the supernovas. Not all of a gun's materials come in the form of metal, yet stars are still involved. Another threshold is crossed to obtain the material, and that one is life. Fairly recently in the history of guns, humans have begun using polymers and plastics to create them, alongside with steel and wood, which is a byproduct of life. Plastics are an unnatural material, having been synthesized from oil by humans in 1907, much after the creation of the natural metals used to build guns. The oil used to make the plastic came from life that had been around millions of years ago. This liquid gold came from previous life that at the time couldn't be decomposed. Instead of fossilizing or decomposing into nutrients, the dead organic material manifested itself in the form of crude oil. Many weapons nowadays are plastic based, like the iconic M16 or the infamous AR-15 and Glock that are always heard about in the news. These are light, cheap, and just as efficient as their steel counterparts, to a degree. There's even more to the narrative than just oil and elements, though. This leads us to the next part of the gun's history, Threshold 6. The next threshold that is crossed in the history of guns is collective learning. This collective learning isn't related much with collective learning from the far past, but rather more modern times. Before guns were invented, people would defend themselves with bows, arrows, spears, and melee weapons, or anything really that could be used in order to protect themselves or attack others. Through collective learning, the first real firearms were created, building upon the primitive Chinese fire lances. Flintlocks were the first real iteration of guns, and they were then improved into muskets, lever-action guns, and then revolvers and automatic weapons. By 1380, pistols were known all over Europe. Using these pistols was a slow and tedious process, though, and after about 400 years of collective learning and improved firearm knowledge, the percussion cap was created. This made it much easier to load weapons, and also led to cartridges and clips instead of muzzle-loaded weapons. Collective learning is the reason for the evolution of guns. Agriculture served an important role in the popularization of guns. When civilizations started to farm and cultivate crops, they started to grow in population. Agriculture allowed them to supply food in larger quantities, and this is how the first cities began to rise. As cities began emerging and populations grew larger, a problem that arose was the protection of these people. Armies and normal citizens got their hands on guns, whether it was for defense or conquest. Afterwards came the modern revolution. Mass production was becoming more commonplace, and guns were being improved even more, with the introduction of bolt action and automatic weapons. Escalating conflicts between nations led to the improvement and stockpiling of weapons. Guns had changed the battlefield. No longer were people using melee weapons or getting up close and personal with the enemy. Now, armies were killing each other from far great distances. Guns like the Maxim machine gun had been invented, the world's first machine gun. Self-loading rifles, bolt-action rifles, automatic pistols were also invented. The British Empire had the renowned Lee Enfield bolt-action rifle in the First World War. After World War I came World War II. Again, limitations in weapons led to the improvement of the old ones through collective learning. Guns have evolved from hunks of rock and metal all the way to large plastic rifles that can fire thousands of rounds per minute and fire extremely accurately. Modern guns have come a long way from being just stardust